welcome everybody. Welcome to the start of the second day of Tracks. So it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Dan Sperling to the stage, so thank you very much.
Well, that was a super quick intro. Hi, yes, it's amazing. Oh my gosh. All right, I am going to be talking about a ton of stuff that we've got coming down. Actually, first few things before I get started. We're gonna be going through a ton of content here. So if there is anything that you're like, I have a question or I wanna go deeper on that, we will try to do it quickly in this session. If we can't, then we will follow up afterwards, okay? The second thing is, I have a tendency to drop swear words, so I apologize right off the bat. If I do, I'm gonna try to find center and not. And then the third thing is, we're talking about stuff that's coming in the future. So, obvious statements, this all might be delivered, some of it might be delayed, some of it might change. We're kind of always in flux as an agile organization, listening to our customers. Speaking to listen to you, I touched on this a little bit when we get started, but more specifically, we have a lot of venues where we take customer feedback and where we learn from what's happening in the market. This is just a quick highlight. I'm not gonna read the slide, but the point of this is we are constantly listening and constantly working to prioritize. If I had infinite resources, I would build every single thing you could ever want. I don't have infinite resources, unfortunately, as much as I try to get them from Steve. However, we do take what we've got and we take the capabilities that we've got, and then we build on that based on your feedback and your guidance. When we start thinking overall about how we prioritize within Teradata, within our products team, we focus on three major areas. This first one, and we've been focusing on these, by the way, for a number of years. The first one is in the trusted AI space. This wasn't always trusted AI. This was our trusted analytics, machine learning AI, et cetera. But this is specifically our start to say, if you're not using the data for more than just simple basic analytics or simple basic BI, you're probably not using the data correctly. If the data itself is not leading to larger insights that enable lots of humans, or better yet, enable applications to make decisions, then you're probably not using the data correctly. So for us, it's not about data storage. It's not about just simple data queries. It's about outcomes that actually change the business or change the customer experience. So we focus everything on what does this mean to create these outcomes? And we put this under a pillar of trusted AI. In order to deliver trusted AI, we focus and differentiate ourselves as a company in two major areas. First, enterprise price performance, and the second, open and connected. On the enterprise price performance side, it is all about, for enterprises, large companies, your companies, how do we deliver scale and performance at a price point that is better than our competition? We hear a lot that Teradata is very expensive. I'm just gonna bluntly touch on that. Yeah, there are pieces that are expensive, especially when you have 2 decades worth of business decisions that have caused a cluster in your environment. But we guarantee you will be, that same cluster of business decisions that are in the Teradata environment, you put it into any of our competition, it will be more expensive. Conversely, if you were to refactor off of a competitive solution and do the refactoring that you would do to move into Teradata, it would be cheaper than our competition. We work every day to prove that. And this is something that we have lots of analysis, we've had lots of external validation on. We do this and we focus on this, again, at scale. For a small workload, we're not gonna be cheaper, but that's not who our focus is. All right, I spent enough time there. Open and connected. This is where we focus and a pivot from where we have been in the past and say, for the data ecosystems today, we're still in a swing outbound towards decentralization. We know that. As a company, that means we must be open and connected. When we use open and connected, we talk about that in the context, I'm gonna build bottom up, talk about in the context of data. How are we making sure that we're supporting open file formats and open table formats and access to all data? We do it in the context of integration with other engines, our QueryGrid product and other products. We don't want you to have to export everything out of other products into Teradata to use it. That's not valuable to you. So how do we connect to other engines or connect to other systems and pull the query and pass the query over and pull the result set back in versus export all the data? And then going up the stack even further, your users, and I mentioned this yesterday, your users are coming out of uni and are saying, like, why can't I use a notebook experience? Or why can't I just dev in R and Python? Or I really like a low-code, no-code experience like KNIME or Dataiku. Why can't I work in those tools? So our integrations with those third parties, rather than forcing you to use Teradata products, I've heard many customers talk about how much they love SQL Assistant, for example. I love SQL Assistant too. However, We also have a lot of people who, like newer entrants into the workforce, who see SQL Assistant for the first time and say, no, I would rather work on like VS Code or something like that, which again, totally fine. So trusted AI, get value out of data, enterprise price performance, make sure that we give you the scale and performance you want at the price point you require, and then open and connected, make sure that we're a part of your ecosystem. We don't try to force you to make us the entire ecosystem. This is a ton of words on a slide, but I'm gonna go forward to some of the things that we've got going on. On this column here in the side here, this is everything we've delivered so far this year. And then these two columns are what we're delivering this quarter and what we've got coming up in the next quarter. At a high level, this year, so far for this first half, we spent a lot of time I'm gonna work top to bottom. We spent a lot of time delivering capabilities in our AI and machine learning space, more in database functions, more capabilities to convert simply out of other solutions into Teradata to use our massively parallel engine, and then also some other capabilities with integrations with third parties. For example, I mentioned already DataRobot and Anaconda. Some of those were some of the ones we had earlier this year. We also talked, and I'm going to talk in depth about many of these, we also talked about our AI Unlimited product, which is our on-demand engine, no overarching system, just an engine. We had significant increases on Google Cloud with our Lake product. We launched on Google Cloud earlier this year. And then finally, we launched our initial, and this is really where we're talking about functionality, unfortunately. I know many of our customers are saying, I want native performance from open table format. We are committed and we are there with you. We launched functionality right now for read-write with both Delta and Iceberg, and then we'll be expanding that. I'll touch on that as well. Coming up, we have a lot more coming up in really enhancing and rounding out what we've got in the portfolio. You can see that there's a fair amount of work being done. I'm now gonna jump to our on-prem product. We got a fair amount of work coming also on our on-prem products for our customers who still require on-premise capabilities. And so in addition to our AI capabilities, our on-demand engine capabilities, and then also our open table format capabilities, continuing to increase our on-prem capabilities. Jumping forward into 2025, we are making some pretty significant decisions about where we're investing in 2025. I am not gonna go into detail on 2025 roadmap, largely because some of it is still being developed with you, our customers, but also candidly because some of the things that we are thinking about probably are a little bit too early, and also we're concerned about some competitive side. So I'm not gonna go into detail on this, but these are the three major areas that we will be developing, bringing products to market in 2025. On the AI at scale side, the primary thing that we will be launching is an on-premise capability for generative AI in an air-gapped type model, as well as tightly integrated with cloud if you need that, depending on which deployment model you need. Ease of use. I touched on this a second ago, tied to SQL Assistant. For people who have used Teradata for a long time, they're used to the tools. They love them. For people that have never seen them before, they're like, this seems like an old tool. So there's a lot of ease of use work that we're doing for people who are used to more modern mobile type experiences. Obviously, we're not gonna deliver it on a phone. It'd be very hard to scroll through a million rows. But at the same time, that experience is what people expect. And then on the experience side, I touched on this a little bit in the keynote, they also expect a more end-to-end seamless workflow, especially in the kind of AI and machine learning space. It is not easy to pass off experiences from, for example, from some type of a data engineer who has curated a great data product and easily hand that over to some type of AI or data scientist, AI worker, who's like interested in building something and doing some type of experimentation, and then handing that off to maybe a developer or someone else to build an application. Those tools that are there, they're external tools. The capabilities that are there are external capabilities. But the underlying engine and the underlying optimized capability we want to deliver from a Teradata perspective. So that experience has to feel like it makes logical sense to go from that kind of experimentation to production and the associated tools that get you there, using, again, like I said, those tools of choice. These probably aren't gonna be Teradata tools, but we wanna make sure it's easy to use the underlying Teradata engine so that you get, again, that scale and performance that you want in a trusted way. And then finally, I touched on open table format. This is specifically Iceberg and Delta at scale with the performance that you would expect out of Teradata. I'm gonna pause here for a second. We're gonna do a lot of interactive. Any questions on these 3 focus areas for 2025? Or anything that you're surprised that you're not seeing as a primary expectation for 2025? All right, let's dig in. First, I'm gonna skip over this. This is our, we call this our ClearScape on a slide. This slide specifically is pretty much everything that we do, and I'm gonna work left to right and talk about what we do within the overarching ClearScape portfolio. First, you heard a lot about our in-database capabilities. That's on the far left-hand side there. Fivetran just released an article this morning. It's a great blog post talking about this idea of how we bring engines to data. One thing that was interesting in there, though, was he was talking about, the CEO was talking about the inability for massively parallel systems generally to parallelize, for his specific one was large logistic regressive models, for example. And then those, unfortunately you have to take that, maybe it's a scikit-learn type thing, and you have to hand it off to an individual node to work. This is where Teradata is differentiated. All of these models, all these functions, that we have within the engine, deep in the engine, are massively parallel. We've taken those functions and parallelized them where possible and made them so they can go across your entire ecosystem. So when, for example, the CEO of Fivetran says, you can't do this with an MPP system, we quickly respond like, you can't? Tell us more about that, right? This is specifically, though, to take advantage of, like I said, that parallelism and that optimized infrastructure. And also, for those of you who have worked with Teradata for a while, our ability to do workload management and say, like, you know what, maybe that science experiment that we've got going on, maybe that isn't the highest priority compared to maybe quarter and book close. So run that slower, still deliver it, but run it slower, don't take capacity away. All of these capabilities we're talking about still are under workload management within Teradata. So deep in-engine capabilities, the mechanisms by which you could connect into us, SQL, native, obviously, Python, R, SAS, et cetera, and then other external languages to get into us. And then the partner integration, I touched on that. I'm actually gonna touch on that a little bit in a second more. The ability to bring external analytics into the system, APIs, obviously to access directly from applications versus from humans or other apps, and then the ability to push to model ops. Martin did an amazing job talking about that this morning. When I talk about this ecosystem, this is how we think about kind of the ecosystem of our partners. This specifically is where we drive super tight integration and then kind of build out from there with the ClearScape capabilities. The people on this slide are people that we work with today. This is not a forward-facing slide. This is how we're enabling you to bring stuff in from the ecosystem and run it inside of Teradata, or leverage those tools externally. For example, you see down there Microsoft and OpenAI. Specifically, this is with Azure AI and Azure ML. The integration, you might prefer to use Azure's tools there for ML, actually. I think AWS is probably a better example of that. We hear customers talk about that they prefer to use the tools in SageMaker, for example. You might prefer to use those even to train models and then be able to pass them back into Teradata to run in production. Again, that integration with Amazon, for example, with AWS, is not just we run on top of it. It is actual integration with their services so that you can meet your users where they are. I'm gonna pause here. Actually, I'm gonna go back one slide and pause here. I have a couple slides on some specifics we're doing, but any questions quickly on the overarching ClearScape offering or ClearScape capabilities inside of Teradata? And I should say, those of you who are using Teradata today have this already. This is not an additional thing. Yeah, Paulo. Mike.
Okay. To add what you said, right? You mentioned before that we will benefit from the massive parallel processing, also the workload management, but I would add one thing, the security, which is so important for many of our customers. We will benefit for all the security layers and certifications we have for in Teradata.
Yes. Yeah, great call, yeah. Thank you. All right. A couple things we've got coming on. I'm gonna touch on these very, very quickly. We talked about bringing Spark, PySpark directly into Teradata. This gives you the ability to pull native Spark-like capabilities into Teradata, which you've already maybe devved against Spark and not have to do a significant amount of manual rewrite to take advantage of the Teradata functions already available. We talked a little bit about AutoML and KNIME integration earlier. Specifically with Teradata open source ML, this is again where we're bringing models in from the external third parties. There's an interesting point Paulo just made around security and trusted data. We believe, obviously, that you should have as much trust in the underlying data that's in your system, of course, I hope. But we also recognize that you might be connecting into data lakes outside of Teradata that might not have the same levels of trust. And you also might be pulling down a model, this is where it's relevant to the open source models, externally that might not have the same amount of trust. For example, pulling some models that are just published on Hugging Face. The obvious statement for all of you is balancing that, I would say candidly, balancing the amount of risk you are taking for the amount of agility you want to have. Without going into a ton of detail, we can talk about this after. There are some very smart people who have lots of opinions on this. But pulling down models from the open source community, there is risk. However, there are many companies, for example, DataRobot, who do work to make sure you can pull down trusted models, but they may not move as quickly as what's happening in the open source community. Again, balancing risk and agility. Accessing data both in your data lakes that may not be curated at all, and then even accessing data in external data shares. There's risk, obviously, in maybe accessing allowing your data scientists to access a large plethora of data, but there's also agility in being able to get access to insights that maybe you haven't yet curated into a formal data product. So again, balancing agility and risk. I talked a little bit about our open analytic framework on stage yesterday, but let me spend a couple more seconds on our open analytic framework. We talked about the in-database functions. Those are functions that we've specifically curated to run in a massively parallel and optimized way. On the other hand, there are a lot of companies who bring and want to bring in, I don't want to use your native functions. And candidly, some of the functions you have, they are not, you don't have the functions I need for some very specific, maybe industry-specific type AI or ML models. I want to just bring a model in from external. I want to import it from, like maybe it's some type of Onyx format or a PML format. I just want to be able to export it and pull it into Teradata and run it inside of Teradata. This is where we use our open analytic framework to allow you to run these models inside of Teradata without having to do any type of massive refactoring of the model or refactoring of that underlying workflow. This is also, for example, where we're pulling in generative AI models and large language models. For example, we are in private preview right now, and so for those of you who are interested in helping us continue to refine this, we're in private preview right now of pulling in actual large language models or foundational models inside of Teradata, and even leveraging GPUs natively inside of Teradata. I should be careful, it's not native to our engine, it's native to those of you who are deeply technical, it's native to our TPA nodes, right? So, but being able to pull those inside of Teradata, and then being able to leverage in a truly disconnected way, leverage large language models internally, again, using GPUs. It's in private preview right now. We'll be bringing this to market in the next 2 quarters-ish. And then, so closing the thought on open analytics framework. This is, again, like I said, where we allow you to do almost any model. There's some stars there, but almost any model inside of Teradata so that you are able to leverage whatever you need to leverage, again, externally, internally, something you purchase, it doesn't matter. And then finally, and relevant to this, is our Anaconda partnership. We have this partnership that is allowing us to also get access to more trusted models, industry-specific models, and then also models that you could actually even procure for yourself in a more seamless way to pull in models natively into Teradata without you having to have some type of external go get the model and then pull it into Teradata through some type of manual process. Questions on anything here?
I have one for you, Dan.
Yeah, Tyler.
A lot of the customers in the room are on Vantage Enterprise.
Yes.
Not all are on Vantage Cloud.
Thank you.
Could you spend a minute just kind of delineating, is all this available on both platforms, et cetera?
Yes, I can. Let me, I apologize. I was not clicking through the slides. I should have been doing that for you. I'm sorry. Let me touch on that. I think we've got a slide. I don't have a slide. Okay, with the exception of our open analytics framework, nearly everything here is available on Vantage Cloud Enterprise in our 1720 release, which is the latest release on Enterprise. A lot of this is available on-prem as well. There's some stars there. For example, like native integration with SageMaker or native integration with Vertex or native integration with Azure ML is really kind of difficult when you're on an on-premise environment that's firewalled off, obviously. So there's some places where we do not have tight integration with the cloud providers for our on-prem products. But even in our on-prem products, the capabilities that I touched on earlier on the left-hand side there, the in-database analytics, the ability to leverage these languages, and then some of these partnerships, even on-prem, are natively available today to you at no additional cost. Yeah. Integration with data, yeah. So I'll touch on that a little bit when we get to open table formats. If I don't specifically go deep on larger catalogs, but I'll touch on it. And if I miss anything, let's just remind me, okay? Yeah, Matt?
Some of our customers are asking us about our SaaS partnership still from the past, and obviously SaaS is on this model here.
Yes. We've had a very, very, very long partnership with SaaS, and we continue to have a long partnership with SaaS. This is an interesting place, though, I'll just be blunt, of both partnerships and sometimes co-opetition. There is very clear opportunity for you to leverage a lot of Teradata's native models and potentially remove the cost burden of SaaS out of your environment. At the same time, there's a lot that SaaS does, and there's a lot of investment, especially people who have had SaaS for a long time, that you already have in your overarching SaaS environment, and it may make sense to more tightly partner with SaaS. So we've made it so that a lot of the SaaS, like with a single line entry, you can actually enable you to run some of the SaaS models against Teradata's engine without having to pass all the data. So for those of you who are looking to, no matter what, reduce your cost on SaaS, we have a lot of opportunities to more easily integrate, or if it's appropriate, potentially migrate those workloads over to Teradata. Cover you, Matt? Okay. I touched on PySpark. I touched on widgets. I touched on GenAI. GenAI, again, tied to Open Analytics Framework. So again, GenAI being available in our Cloud Lake product, not available in our enterprise product. And then I touched on our Open Analytics Framework, again, in our Cloud Lake product. And I will be better about going through this clicking rather than just talking. Okay, Ask.ai. Many of our customers heard about our launch of Ask.ai, which is our natural language interface into Teradata in console. This is available in Cloud Lake. This is a knowledge intelligence capability right now, very specifically focused on helping people more easily use Teradata. You want to understand a function, you want to understand like like maybe how to create a string for specific needs, etc. Our Ask.ai function can help you there. We are continuing to work. For those of you, I've had some questions already this year about, hey, what are you doing larger to, for example, can't I just ask Teradata, like what was the highest grossing store, or what was the retail branch with the most churn, et cetera. The reality, and this is ironically tied to your question about catalogs, the reality is you have a lot of data in your Teradata systems. Some of it is real. A lot of it is not exactly real. What I mean by that is you may have, for whatever reason, have a duplicate of some data tied to customer. You may have a duplicate of some data tied to maybe some projections you're doing around what a customer could look like in the future or what a store could look like in the future. You may have some data that is actually almost going backwards and trying to assess what happened over time. So that data is not all current. To simply ask Teradata to say, in all the data within Teradata, tell me about this store, it is highly likely that it would come back with a hallucination, right? But more specifically, it would come back with data that is not accurate. So what we're doing is we're working with companies like Microsoft, obviously with their agents capabilities and their Copilot capabilities, and then companies like AWS with Q to say, what would it look like for us to leverage those agent capabilities to go against the catalogs you have, or against more specifically your data products, and say, this is a trusted data product, leverage this for that decision. Don't just look across all of Teradata, right? And even worse, don't just look across the entire environment. The second piece is, and now coupling with that environment side, the second piece is a lot of our customers are like, wait a minute, I need data out of other systems when you answer that question. So we are tuning and listening to you. We talked about this again. Last year we talked about what we were going to do in this intelligence space. We're continuing to expand, but we're tuning our strategy on how do we better leverage the larger ecosystem And how do we make sure that the data we're responding back with that agent is specific to your data? We are focused, like I said, right now on understanding how to use Teradata with the agent. We're exploring and doing research around how we can partner with the larger ecosystem on delivering more data intelligence via some type of an agent or copilot. Does that make sense, the separation of those two and the challenge? Okay, questions on this? Okay. I'm going to spend a few minutes now on AI Unlimited. AI Unlimited is, we stepped back a bit and looked at the market and said, there is a whole lot of movement in the open table format space. There's a whole lot of movement in the overarching ask to separate compute and storage. There's a whole lot of movement that is now leading to this idea of like, can I bring engines to the data? Instead of, can I create like large data, like ecosystems that somehow talk to each other via data meshes, data fabrics, et cetera. So what we did was we took Teradata's engine and removed it from the kind of the overarching ecosystem around Teradata that makes up our overarching Teradata platform, our Vantage Cloud platform. And we said, let's just pull the engine out. And we made it so that the engine still has all those ClearScape capabilities that I talked about. We made it so the engine still has the ability to talk to the storage or use QueryGrid or talk to open table formats, but be able to be deployed in a much more seamless way that is, a much more on-demand way, that is not this like large standing system, but instead just something you can populate. You will hear us, and I'm gonna like say something that we're working through right now, you will hear us say, this is a serverless engine. It's not exactly a serverless engine, so we're trying to be very careful with our words here. So what I want to say instead is it's an on-demand engine. We're exploring what a serverless opportunity could look like, of course. We're exploring what a different delivery system could look like with an engine. However, right now we've deployed this, it's in private preview in two major kind of deployment vehicles. First, it's in the CSP marketplace. All of you can work with us and go download this today and use this in your environment. All of you can also, if you're on the Azure side, you can play with also in the private preview with this in Microsoft Fabric, as we talked about. Let me talk through a couple different kind of experiences. This is our team at Build this last year when we launched this. This was actually a super fun day. Let me talk about a little bit, let me talk a little bit about how to use this though. If you are, for example, a data scientist or a data engineer, how many of you are sick of hearing me talk about AI? Okay, perfect. Let me not talk about AI. Let me instead talk about a classic ETL workload. You want to do some type of ETL or ELT to get in from one source system to another source system, okay? And you want a very simple way to say, like, here is where it is coming from, here is where it's going to. AI Unlimited can simply say, via like a notebook experience or some other type of SQL, like you can simply say, like, I want you to do this thing, here is the source data, and here is where I want you to put it, right? There's nothing running at all. You would say go, and now you can instantiate like on an EC2 instance or any instance, and you can instantiate it, you say go, it spins up, it runs, and you turn it off. And then the workload that you define that you want to happen, for example, again, in a notebook experience, the workload, the workflow runs, completes the work, and then it's done, and it turns off, and then you see that I took from the source system, I did my ETL, whatever, over here. You can have it be, obviously, if a human can do that, then you obviously can do it with an application. You can have an event-based thing that says, like, this thing occurred, I want you to spin up, I want you to do that ELT job, whatever it is, and I want you to shut down. And of course, you can say like, well, actually, I've got literally millions of these coming. Maybe you have a sensor in all your manufacturing shops, and you say like, I actually want all the sensor data to be streaming through and go through this engine and then go over there, right? You can have it running constantly if you would like. Again, think about it though, is just the engine that works the workflow that you've defined, not managing all the data, not connecting to systems, not having like a SQL assistant kind of console experience, et cetera. The same thing in Microsoft Fabric. You can imagine a user who is really interested in doing something that has a pretty significant scale. For those of you in Azure, we find that our large enterprise, and this is no shade to Microsoft at all, but we find a lot of our enterprise customers say that Azure Synapse is not as scalable or capable as they need it to be. And so they leverage other products. They leverage us, they leverage some of our competitors, but they leverage other products within Azure for really large scale either analytics or large-scale machine learning, or even, honestly, large-scale complex queries. You can be in Microsoft Fabric, in Power BI, for example, using, you asked about catalogs, using Purview. You have maybe something defined in ADF, and then you say, like, I actually need to run this really significant, whatever it is. Let's say it's a significant machine learning function across a large amount of data in one lake. You can plumb through Fabric, plumb it, and just use the AI engine, AI Unlimited engine, and then say, like, in my kind of workflow, I want to use AI Unlimited rather than Synapse, rather than Data Warehouse, and then it just runs, and then it turns off. Again, and think about it as an engine that's totally separated from the rest of the overarching system. This is a pretty significant shift from Teradata's history, like we talked about. This is a pivot for us saying, the world is continuing to change, we will change with it. We're gonna make sure that we've got a really strong system for those of you who rely on Teradata to close your books. But we're also gonna make sure that we've got a modern engine that you can bring to the data for large, complex analytics. Questions on that? I'm gonna jump over this slide before I talk about it.
I'll ask a question.
Yeah, Matt.
We actually had a demonstration yesterday of Fabric, so thanks very much for Rob at the back there. A question that came in late, though, was about, is there any integration with DBT? You talk about using it as for ETL pipeline type processing.
So there likely will be integration with DBT. We already have integrated with DBT in our core product. You can imagine pretty much everything that we integrate in the core product, we integrate into AI Unlimited as well. It's the same underlying engine. The difference with DBT specifically and some of the others, we can today. It would be a little bit of plumbing. The difference is we want to make these experiences really, really seamless and easy, and so that you don't have to do any manual effort to connect a DBT type experience over into AI Unlimited. Yeah. The reality also is there's a little bit of overlap there as well. So we would want to work through the use case. Other questions? Yeah.
What problem does that solution actually solve if you have a Teradata setup already in place?
Great question. The question was, like, if you already have Teradata, what problems does it solve? So first of all, we want more people that don't use Teradata. But the second reality, though, is what we hear, and this is a super fascinating. I'm gonna use your question, and I'm going to get up on a little soapbox here. So I'm sorry. Yeah, it'll teach you to ask questions. No, I'm kidding. The weird part for being Teradata, God, how do I make this short? We have so many customers who are running amazing business-critical workloads on top of Teradata. And then a data scientist is like, I really am excited to do this thing, and they say, no. Because there's no way I'm gonna let you run that. Like, I'm not gonna let you play with Teradata. Either risk taking away compute or risk corrupting data or doing something with data. Of course, from a Teradata perspective, we've put all the controls in place to allow you to say, yes, do that. But it still is like they're completely misaligned incentives. The IT person who's keeping Teradata is not, like, his number or her number one goal is not to innovate. It's to keep that system stable and cost effective. On the flip side, the person who's the data scientist, the data analyst, whatever, their incentive is to figure out new ways to do something in the business, right? So what we have found is, even though we have workload management and we can protect it, IT teams understandably are still like, no, that is not happening. So and then the second thing that we've heard and seen, not heard, we've seen very, very clearly that frustrates us, understandably, is the cost of Teradata inside a really large enterprise is this much, right? And there's this thing that says, like, if I allow the data scientist to come on, the cost will be more, and then it's even worse, and I'm gonna have to pay more money to Teradata. Instead, they say, like, I don't want to expand the Teradata system, like, for this. I'm just gonna, no, the answer is no. And then they go buy something else. And now you have two systems, you have duplication of data, you have the cost of that, the cost of, and overall, always the cost is more in the end. However, the underlying Teradata system cost did not go up, right? And so this is another misaligned, like, incentive around, like, my goal as IT is to keep that cost as low as humanly possible. And the other person's like, do whatever you need on cost. I'm gonna make sure the thing I do is valuable, right? So give me the money, give me the capacity. Those are the two reasons why we said, even for customers who are using Teradata, you can give the data scientist or give an analyst or give anybody who wants to experiment or play, give them the ability to say, like, I just wanna run something real quick, and then I wanna shut it down. And I'm just gonna use whatever capacity I need for that job, and then I'm gonna not throw it away, but I'm gonna throw away the instance and not have any more spend. So those are the primary drivers. We're trying to, as you can imagine, for us, we're trying to remove any excuse for companies to leverage Teradata's AI and machine learning capabilities, not just our classic data warehouse, data governance capabilities. Other questions? Great question, thank you. Okay, let's jump forward. We were in the kind of AI and analytics track. Let's jump forward into the enterprise price performance track. I'm not going to read this. We believe there's a couple things. This is a fantastic slide written by some very brilliant people, not me. This is how we think generally, though, when you're thinking about this larger architecture, how do you move forward and think about an architecture that will support your business, not just today, but going into the future? Of course, we have a spin on this that's Teradata, no surprise. But this helps you think about where are the pieces I need to make sure, if I have a checklist, did I adequately cover this in my architecture? For us, what we built with Cloud Lake, many of you have seen this, so I'm going to go through this very quickly. If you want to go deeper, we can do this in an offline session. For us, we took all of the great stuff that we have in enterprise and we made sure that we still have a lot of that available to you today here in this what we call the primary cluster. A lot of the capabilities that people are used to and love, we have in the primary cluster, including block storage for super high performance asks. On the other hand, we have a lot of people who are saying, I want this multi-cluster capability. You can see that we've separated out. You don't need to call it a BI cluster. You don't need to call it a marketing cluster. That's not the point. We were trying to give you the example of you could do clusters by department if you wanted to charge departments individually. You could do clusters by workload if you want to have different workloads that run on different pieces and never impact each other. You might have, for example, some type of workload that literally, data engineering, literally only runs once a day, right? For some type of very specific thing. Spin the cluster up, spin it down. These all have the ability to run against the primary cluster's block storage. This is connected to the primary cluster. And then all of these have also the ability to run against our data that is in an object store. Whether you're using our high performance object file system, OFS, or whether you're using an open file format in S3 or whatever, like you're using Parquet or JSON or CSV, right? Or if you're using an open table format, again, Iceberg or Delta. You have the ability to have these be completely, as you need, ephemeral as well. These don't have any data connected to them, so you can shut them down, start them back up whenever you need to, and leverage the data already that's available. This architecture is available today in Microsoft AWS, in Azure AWS and Google Cloud. We also have portions of this. You can imagine some of this is not as easy on-prem, but we have portions of this available on-prem as well. So for example, you might decide, and going back to the idea of the primary cluster, you might decide that you want to run some super high performance workload that requires maybe, we call them sub-second queries or tactical queries. You have something where you're looking up a customer phone number, and or maybe it's a customer ID, and you must have it come back for whatever reason, for a business reason, you must have it come back in, let's say, 400 milliseconds, right? Object storage generally isn't fantastic for really small records because you're pulling the entire object back, and it's probably not going to have it's probably going to exceed the latency requirements you have. So we still have, and this is a very large competitive differentiator for us, we still have the ability to do those super small, single record lookups in blazing fast speed, especially once you get into the millions of queries. And we've got the ability to have true separation of compute and storage, fully everything in object, lowering your costs, et cetera, available in Object Store. This is overarching our next generation architecture that we launched, again, like I said, on AWS now almost a year and a half ago, launched in Azure last year, and then just launched on Google Cloud. I talked a lot about these ideas of the primary cluster. I talked a lot about the compute clusters and how you could create compute clusters. Let me spend a couple of seconds now on the analytics clusters. What we found was there was still the desire to separate large-scale analytics into its own cluster and not have any overlap with some of the other workloads. We put these into our analytics clusters, which is where you're able to bring in whatever you need, again, from an external perspective, into the environment and build models inside of Teradata that might not be leveraging Teradata's native engine, but are brought in maybe, again, like I said, from any of those external partners or a model that you build and train on your own. Within Cloud Lake, we heard loud and clear that if you're going to have all this stuff, you need to somehow govern it. So we have financial governance built in. These are slides from the actual console. We have financial governance built into the console. You can imagine the ability to go in, I believe this is the build, there we go. You can imagine the ability to go in and see inside the console, see what is happening in the system, what is happening from a spend perspective, and where is the utilization occurring. Let this build out. You can also do some work around predictive and say like, well, if I'm here now, where am I gonna be with this current level of spend? Where am I gonna be by the end of the month? What does my consumption look like within the environment? Overarching, our goal is to create the ability for you to, actually I'm gonna skip on that for a while. Our goal is to create the ability for you to be able to understand the spend within the system as a kind of administrator, but also as a consumer, like understand what you're individually doing with your consumption. So if you're the consumer, you can figure out how much I'm spending. If you're the admin, you can look across all the people who are consuming and maybe even help them, if they're overspending, help them understand how they could optimize their usage. Now, for those people who are on-prem, I've got a very quick slide in here. Our strategy, like I talked about, is to help you start migrating so that you can then modernize. Most of our customers, no matter what refactoring effort you're doing, Teradata, anybody else, they take many, many, many years to migrate an enterprise system. To modernize a large enterprise system, to clean up decades or years worth of bad decisions, candidly. That's not always bad decisions. They're just decisions at the time that were the best decision you could make, and now it's resulted in a lot of things that you are frustrated by or cause you to be slow or cause it to be high cost. The idea that we have is like, instead, just get to the cloud if that is your corporate mandate. If there's business value in moving to the cloud, get to the cloud and then modernize from there piecemeal by piecemeal. This is true with any large development effort. You don't refactor an entire code base. You refactor piece by piece. Same kind of thing with your overarching data refactoring or data modernization. We have the fastest path to get you, and we do this every single weekend. Most of the time, our migration on the weekends, we do this every single weekend. We migrate really, really large customers with potentially petabytes of data in a weekend, and we do that cutover. We've done hundreds and hundreds of these. We do these hundreds and hundreds, though, with the largest companies in the world. So when we say hundreds, we're talking about the largest banks, the largest airlines, the largest telcos, the largest healthcare centers. When we talk about the ability, though, to not just migrate and us, we also are part of an ecosystem. So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do we be a better member of the ecosystem so that when you migrate, if you're gonna stay on-prem or migrate to the cloud, that the stuff around you can either migrate with you as well or maybe stay back behind or maybe it moves first. Again, your overarching cloud migration strategy will vary. But if you're using QueryGrid, QueryGrid is our ability, our native ability to talk between systems and pass that query. Our intent is, again, not to move the data. Our intent is to just pass off the query. So we have integrations with a lot of different systems. Of course, we have integrations between ourselves. So if you're on-prem and in the cloud, or if you're in multiple clouds, the ability to pass between those clouds, but then also the ability to pass between products as well. This is something that we see a lot, which is fascinating to us. We see a lot of customers put portions of their analytic workloads in one cloud provider and then put their data apps in another cloud provider. We've seen this in a bunch of companies, which is an odd architecture decision. So we're trying to say, how do we rapidly enable you to connect data between these two systems, but not move data between the clouds? And even with the changing costs, right, of egress costs, how do we make it so that you don't have to move all the data between clouds? We spend a lot of time on QueryGrid to try to limit the amount of data that's moved and allow you to create this query fabric, query mesh, et cetera, with QueryGrid. Skip over this for time. On-prem. I've talked a lot about the cloud because obviously both our customers, you, and also the industry analysts want us, and the various investors want us to make sure that we've got a long tail business in the cloud, of course. But we still have a ton of customers who need on-prem capabilities, and we continue to invest. We're refreshing all of our storage and all of our compute on the IFX line. This will last us into 2028. So all of our customers who are looking into products that will be, when I say last us into 2028, sell into 2028, this will last us into the early 2030s. This is customers who need to have a guaranteed long-term strategy for on-prem capabilities. We also, though, have a clear partnership with Dell, where we're looking for customers are telling us they want more, maybe some type of a converged or maybe even hyper-converged platform They want maybe a lower cost, get going quickly platform, or they want, and this is where we're gonna be looking at expanding our AI capabilities as well. They want capabilities from a third party that isn't Teradata, candidly. They want it from a trusted supplier like Dell. So we were saying, absolutely, we're gonna build this. We launched this last year. We've refreshed the compute, refreshed the generation of hardware, and launched the Dell capabilities on-prem as well. Let's skip over this. Before I jump into Open Connected, I have been rambling too much, so I'm gonna be rushing through some of the rest of this. Any questions, though, on either the cloud products or the on-prem products tied to what I just talked about? And again, if we wanna go deep into the architecture, we will have an offline conversation on that. Okay, Open and Connected. Let me pause real quick and say, open table formats continue to dominate in the data space, continue to dominate the conversation. Your question earlier about catalogs. Catalogs specifically are an interesting space where we are now starting, it's not conflation exactly, but we're confusing the conversation around data catalogs with, like for example, Unity or Polaris or others, right? With the larger conversation of like overarching, kind of like ecosystem catalogs. So we're seeing the companies that we have really tight partnerships with, like Calibra or Alation, or of course with Purview and others. We're seeing like kind of a mix of the data catalogs with open table formats and the larger catalog companies as well. This is an interesting space that we are candidly watching and making sure we play with everybody to make sure that we are able to meet you where you are, specific with your data products. For us, the most important thing is making sure that you can achieve the goal of data democratization in your company and give people access and searchable access to data. But the industry is still figuring out how we're gonna do that, especially tied to open table format catalogs. The thing for us though, as we started going down the path, we said, we wanna make sure that we are as open as possible, and thank goodness other companies are doing this. So this is not just a Teradata thing, but we wanted to be open as possible. So we made sure that we supported Delta and Iceberg, and we're building that natively into our engine. We made sure that we were open with our cataloging as well. So we would leverage and use the catalogs of choice and not drive towards a proprietary catalog. For us, for those of you who don't know about open table formats, I'm not gonna go into detail here. I would have if I had 20 more minutes, but we can follow up and go into detail. But for us, we will continue to invest in the catalog of choice. And as we see, for example, evolutions happening, it will be interesting to see, for example, what Microsoft does with OneLake. As we see evolutions happening, we will evolve with the market. Our goal is to not be proprietary or closed with our open table capabilities. Our goal is to make sure that we bring the performance that you expect to open table formats and as they evolve both now and into the future. I'm gonna pause on this because this is a high level. I'm not gonna talk about this, but you can grab a picture and we can talk about this offline. On the open table format side, we also appreciate that data is going to continue, like data ingestion, data usage, data control, data governance is going to continue to evolve there. For us though, we still must give the ability for users to use the data that's in Teradata and have access in and out of that data. So we have continued to invest in our relationships with companies like DBT and with open source projects like Airbyte and Airflow. And so the ability to make it easier to both get data into Teradata or leverage Teradata for those transformations, we continue to focus not just on open table formats outside, but also the mechanisms to get data and manage data inside of Teradata. We can follow up on architecture. I'm gonna close here. We've got a whole lot of stuff that we've been working on delivering over the last year. We've got a bunch of stuff coming in the next couple years, like I touched on, with a continued emphasis, I know you're gonna love me saying it, but a continued emphasis on AI, specifically around how we unlock AI applications at scale, with a continued emphasis on all data, including data that's in open table formats, and a continued emphasis on making it easier for these kind of end-to-end journeys, the end-to-end workflows to move out into the product. Questions, this is my last slide, because I didn't go in, yeah. Questions, I'll leave this up on the screen. Anything I didn't touch on that you expected me to touch on or wish I would have?
Thank you very much then. Yeah, go on. As you can probably tell, there's a lot of content here, and there's way more slides, so thanks very much, Dan, for this. If you want to know any more, please come and visit the booths outside. A lot of those booths are covering the content here, or come and find me or Dan, and we can arrange a more detailed session for you. Okay, so thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you. Appreciate it.